spostano, non vengono, diciamo, agevolati dalla previdenza. Molti di questi migranti ci chiedono spesso di fare una battaglia almeno per cercare di dare il sussidio agli immigrati che rimangono qua per un numero di anni molto ridotto, sapendo che molti di questi qui la media della permanenza sul territorio italiano di un immigrato è di 15 anni. Abbiamo questo caso per i lavoratori senegalesi, ad esempio, arrivano qui dopo 15 anni, poi ritornano nel loro paese e questo non gli consente di prendere la pensione. Per quanto riguarda, per rispondere direttamente alla domanda del collega, se lui ha avuto questo problema, che ha lavorato per 6 anni, non ha potuto avere accesso alla previdenza, magari c'è un altro problema. Il problema non è perché si dà agli immigrati e non gli hanno dato la previdenza. Sicuramente se viene da me domani o lunedì cercheremo di risolvere il problema. Quindi io non ho capito nel dettaglio esattamente perché non ha potuto usufruire.
Ma forse non interessa.
Sì.
Perché non c'è la convenzione con l'Italia. Come mai uno che sta in Germania recepisce i contributi versati? Io sono stato nell'America Latina con un passaporto, un contratto.
Sì.
Nazionale al 100%.
Allora,
Nazionale al 100%.
sì.
E rimanda. Posso far vedere il passaporto mio. È l'unico dall'Italia per l'Equador.
Sì.
Magari ecco qui abbiamo aperto proprio la possibilità di una possibile connessione, anche l'ha invitato anche Ivan Sagné a effettivamente
sì, ma questo
verificare.
Riguarda la legislazione nazionale interna a un paese, cioè ci sono quei paesi che hanno firmato delle convenzioni con altri paesi che consentono a uno che ha lavorato in un determinato paese che quando immigra anche in quel paese possa usufruire della previdenza.
Però insomma intanto una
Non
correlazione.
mi sembra...
Io direi che qui purtroppo dobbiamo finire. Ringrazio tantissimo tutti gli ospiti, ringrazio il pubblico che ci ha seguito in maniera molto attenta e insomma con la partecipazione. Rimanete a Conversano, a Lector in Fabula e ci vediamo presto. Grazie.
mic is on. So, good afternoon. The ends of democracy. This is another panel organized in cooperation between Lector in Fabula and Eurozine, Europe Talks to Europe. We are to discuss the ends of democracy. To my left, there is CLAUDIA, who is a member of the think tank Policy Network. She is political scientist and working mostly on the theme of populism. There is a new book that I'm sure she will advertise on the subject. To my right, there is ONOFRIO Romano from Bari University Political Science Department. He's a sociologist. And IVAYLO DITCHEV, Bulgarian anthropology researcher, professor. From Sofia University, also a lecturer, visiting professor to universities both in Paris, in the United States, and other places. The topic of today's debate is the ends of democracy. The topic has been proposed by Eurozine to debate a little bit deeper the theme that has already been published on Eurozine. And let me just advertise briefly. Eurozine is a network magazine. That means we have some 80 top European magazines in the network that provide content and provide comments, questions, and engage in a debate. It's a genuine European debate, national debates, mixing together, translating into other languages, fighting for the common European public sphere. The topic of ends of democracy comes from the notion that when you look around, the world is getting more and more democratic. More and more people, when you count them, live in democracy. The regimes that were not so fond of democracy concept are becoming democracies, and more people come to live in democracy all around the world. But does that mean the world has ended, the history has ended, or democracy has ended? Or is it the right time, we prefer to ask rather, what are the ends of democracy? What are the goals that are behind the democracy? In Poland, I'm Polish myself, my name is Wojciech PRZYBYLSKI, I'm editor-in-chief of Eurozine. In Poland we have had recently a debate about the nature of conflict in the term of liberal democracy. And I believe this debate is ongoing in Europe now, reading also and hearing from what ONOFRIO will have to say. It seems something we did not foresee before, that the two notions of liberalism and democracy within this term may not be so friendly to each other. But explain us why. We agreed to have 10 minutes introductory remarks, after which we will have engagement and discussion in the panel, and immediately afterwards we will ask you for comments, questions, and responses. Onofrio. So, is liberty a genuinely democratic value? Should we always associate democracy with liberty or with something else? The mic is yours.
abbiamo concordato che io parlassi in italiano e questo per, penso, andare incontro alla maggioranza dell'uditorio. Ebbene, non pensavo di parlare per primo, ci eravamo accordati che insomma fosse IVAYLO a parlare per primo, ma va bene così. Io penso che vorrei insomma andare un po' alle radici di questo conflitto tra i nuovi populismi e il regime democratico. E penso che per andare alle radici di questo occorra innanzitutto prendere atto di un fatto che era stato già riferito da WOJCIECH, il fatto appunto che ormai più del 75% dei paesi del mondo ha adottato istituzioni democratiche e questo non può che rallegrarci. D'altro canto, io sono altrettanto convinto, e penso che anche questo sia un fatto, l'aumento quantitativo delle istituzioni democratiche mi sembra inversamente proporzionale alla qualità delle democrazie, anche nelle democrazie più mature. E io penso che il frangente chiave della trasformazione della democrazia coincida con la nascita di quello che oggi chiamiamo regime neoliberale, vale a dire quel frangente che si pone tra la fine degli anni 70 e l'inizio degli anni 80. Tutti siamo abituati a pensare a quel frangente come ad un passaggio che ha determinato semplicemente una ristrutturazione economica dei regimi occidentali di democrazia matura e quindi sostanzialmente un passaggio da una economia fondata su un welfare forte, fondata sul protagonismo dello Stato, sulla primazia dello Stato nel pianificare lo sviluppo delle nazioni, sotto la garanzia di relazioni internazionali larghe e ben strutturate, secondo appunto l'asse est-ovest, ad un regime nel quale il mercato, privo di confini, quindi il mercato globale, prendeva il sopravvento. Ecco, a mio avviso c'è stata un'ulteriore trasformazione che ha interessato quel frangente lì e che tuttavia è risultata meno visibile e che viene in chiaro soprattutto oggi. Oggi la vediamo meglio, questa trasformazione. Bene, per dirla in soldoni, e lo dico in maniera forte, e quando le cose vengono dette in maniera forte rischiano di essere anche banalizzate, però a mio avviso rende l'idea, io penso che la libertà l'abbia avuta vinta sulla democrazia. Noi siamo abituati a pensare la libertà e la democrazia come, appunto, diceva WOJCIECH, coerenti, come un tutt'uno. Ebbene, a mio avviso occorre un po' distinguere la libertà individuale che si esercita in un ambito microsociale e questa indubbiamente, questo tipo di libertà, la libertà delle opzioni individuali, il processo di individualizzazione, questo si è senz'altro amplificato. La libertà singolare è estesa quanto mai prima, questo ce lo dice in maniera molto chiara Zygmunt Bauman, ma in maniera altrettanto chiara Bauman ci dice: a fronte di questo incremento della libertà individuale, ciascuno di noi è del tutto rassegnato al fatto che la trasformazione del mondo ci sembra impossibile. che l'idea di un rivoluzionamento del sistema, dei rapporti sociali nel suo complesso, questa idea di trasformazione grande che invece era molto ben presente all'inizio del Novecento, ci sono stati frangenti dell'umanità in cui la possibilità di una grande trasformazione era vivida, si sentiva, eccitava anche politicamente le cittadinanze. Ecco, tutto questo ormai è impossibile. Siamo del tutto persuasi che questo sistema è, nei suoi caratteri fondamentali, è sostanzialmente immutabile. E quindi che cosa viene meno di fronte all'incremento della libertà individuale? Viene meno la libertà collettiva, cioè quella libertà di incidere sulle grandi determinanti che influenzano la nostra vita. Su quelle non abbiamo sovranità sul microcosmo individuale. Mi blocca Wojciech. Please, Wojciech.
I will be interrupting during the whole session, just to have a debate.
Yes.
So your 10 minutes is over. But we will come back, I'm sure, to these themes that you mentioned. And I wanted to turn to IVAYLO now. Speaking of the democracy, we have usually called it, again, the liberal democracy, but maybe we should rather now start using terms of mass democracy, democracy of masses. The masses actually...
I would rather use the word flows, democracy of flows.
Explain us why.
Yeah, but in some way what I will say is connected to the previous. Freedom is obviously a value of something, an utopia if you want, but there are some backlashes of freedom. There are negative effects of it. And one of them is this fluid state of our society in which they have entered, especially states at the periphery of Europe. So I want a little bit to link it to the previous session here, the panel on migration. We are actually talking a lot of that. So is it possible, my question is it possible to have political action, to have a polity in a world where people are not fatally attached to a territory? That they can choose to, not only to choose their leaders, but also choose the place where they live. And this is ever more the case. Now, numerically it's not so important as a phenomenon. They say that 10% of Europeans live outside of their country of birth, but that's not so much. For Bulgaria, a small peripheral country, it's, for the last 25 years, something like 2 million people left, either left forever or come and go. So I did a research a couple of years ago on these people who are mobile, who go abroad, come back. Their preoccupation with politics are very different from those which have people who have chosen to live forever in some place. They don't participate to strikes. They're not so much interested in political ideologies and things like that. Their preoccupations are like it was said here in the previous section with pensions, for instance, these sort of things. But on the other side, they still have in their mind home country where they project their political passions. And very often they are nationalists, they are very radical, they push their compatriots to do foolish things, often from far away. So my question is this. In this new world of mobility, where mobility is possible, where we can at any moment choose to leave and to go abroad, how shall we have, what sort of political action do we have? And won't our political leaders become some sort of managers who direct flows of populations? For instance, attracting wanted populations, the creative class, they speak about the creative class, that is very, very important for some cities in order to attract capital, and then reject, repel unwanted populations. And again, Balkan example, Hungarian, Romanian, Bulgarian, everybody is very happy when the Roma population leaves to Europe, because they want to get rid of them. It's a very open racist discourse. They go to France. France tries to repel them, bring them back somehow, because they don't want them. So what becomes politics in this case? Attracting some, rejecting others. And of course, in the sphere of culture, in the sphere of communication, the internet is something that makes it possible for people to have before themselves this other scene of politics, live with fears, with images of distant suffering, engage in battles that don't have anything to do with them. In the the 19th century, Gabriel Tarde noticed this, that actually in France there were anti-Semites in small villages where there was no single Jew at all. So the media effect, the effect of creating these spaces, these imaginary spaces, maybe opens up the door to some sort of imaginary politics, which is quite good soil for populism that we will be talking about. And just a final word about this migration situation that we have at present. It was noted by a political analyst, Ivan Krstev, that Eastern Europe and Central and Eastern Europe proved to have a sort of compassion deficit. And this is strange because these populations, like Hungary, when the wall fell in 1989, 200,000 Hungarians left for Austria, for Yugoslavia and Austria in one day. 600,000 Poles left to UK. Now all of a sudden, no compassion. Why? And the debate in Bulgaria is all around this sort of trying to find out what the secret reasons of these migrants are. They say they flee war, but no, in fact they come for our money. And this is to a large extent due to the fact that many of these people were engaged or have some relatives who profited from the generosity of the West when under communism, when people who fled communism were generously welcomed by Western countries, and saying that they were politically persecuted. In fact, they were not. And this sort of intimate knowledge of the reasons for this migration somehow construct this conspiracy feeling and this negative attitude. So, concluding with this, on one side, the possibility to have a world polity, a world in which we all somehow choose, elect governments, politics, have some sort of notion of common interest. On the other side, the possibility to have a ever more fragmented political space where there is no common goal, and there's everybody is more and more closed in their own imaginary spaces.
Thank you very much. Of what you're saying in the migration crisis that we observe today in media, you can easily link that with election periods upcoming in particular country where you build up the momentum before the election based on fears, which may lead to a conclusion that perhaps democracy doesn't need elections. Perhaps democracy is not about elections. Democracy might be about something else, and then we can make decisions, or we can take decisions in different ways than elections. I guess Claudia will argue for that, but I might be wrong.
Thanks, Wojciech. I think that's a very good introduction because I'm going to argue slightly along those lines and hopefully give a somewhat optimistic point of view about democracy today. Don't know how many other people agree with me, but I think it's become rather fashionable these days to despair the death of democracy. I mean, people are voting less, people aren't really joining political parties as much anymore. There's low trust in our governing politicians. There's the rise of populist parties, both on the right and on the left, now we've seen in Greece and Spain. But I would like to argue that all of these things aren't necessarily a sign that people are disengaged or apathetic, but I think that there is certainly a certain disillusionment and almost anger. People are disaffected with the political class and with the way that the system of governing works, and I think that it's largely this feeling, in addition to perhaps other fears or insecurities that are linked to cultural or economic reasons. But I think that political disaffection is a big driving factor for people voting for populist parties around Europe. In my research that I did, I was looking mostly at the UK in comparison to other European countries, but in the UK, the polling that I commissioned, only 31% of people feel like their voice counts in any way in the decisions being taken by their local politicians. At the national level, only 21% of people feel like they have any sort of voice in what their politicians are doing. And this number is even lower amongst people who vote for parties like the UK Independence Party, which is like the right-wing populist party, or the Scottish Nationalist Party, which is the kind of left-wing independence movement in Scotland. So people who vote for these kind of protest movements feel like their voice just doesn't count in the political system. And when they're asked what they think about the current system of government, 68% of people overall think that it needs significant improvement. And it's even higher amongst people who vote for these populist parties. But I think that in this sense, I don't think that populism is purely a bad thing. Obviously, we need to be careful because there can be the threat about populists tending towards exposing some views which are anti-liberal or anti-liberal democracy. But I think that if we look at this rise of populism as a signal that the system of governing isn't working as best as it could be and we could improve it, then it could be a good thing for democracy. I mean, after all, the system that we have currently, what we consider democracy, dates from the late 18th century and is reflective of that time. It's still extremely hierarchical, it's quite closed, it's very elite-driven. I don't know if today we had to redesign democracy from scratch, that we would think that the best way to determine the will of the people would be that every 4 or 5 years, people would shuffle to a polling station, wait in a queue, put a little tick beside the name of the politician or the party that they like the most or perhaps dislike the least, based probably on what they've seen in just a few weeks during the election campaign on TV or in the media, and then for 4 or 5 years, they have no say in the decisions that are being taken which are affecting them. So in a 21st century that's more decentralized, more open and less hierarchical, our governing system doesn't necessarily reflect that change that we've experienced. And here is where I'd like to bring in a bit of optimism and perhaps draw some inspiration from ancient Athens and the kind of original conception of democracy, not to be confused with what's happening in Greece today, but considering the fact that at that time a lot of governing decisions were taken by randomly selected citizens. Granted, at that time it was only men, I'm not advocating that today, but randomly selected citizens who had an equal chance of being chosen to participate. This was a recurring process, so at one point or another everyone took part. There was a greater legitimacy in the decisions that were taken by that. People weren't driven by wanting to be re-elected in these deliberations, but by wanting to serve the greater good. And I think that there could be a case to be made to move towards more of a mixed system. I'm not going to say get rid of elections and be that radical, because I still think that our elected politicians serve an important role in society today. But I think that that we could complement the current system of governing with having more randomly selected citizens' assemblies and citizens' juries making certain political public policy decisions. And if this seems really abstract, I'd like to say that there are a number of places in the world which I've studied in my recent research where this is starting to happen. So one example is in the city of Melbourne in Australia. This was just a couple months ago. 43 randomly selected citizens from Melbourne came together over 4 months, deliberated, and they presented their elected city council with a 10-year, $4 billion plan for their city. And the council reviewed this and took it seriously and has accepted about 90% of the proposals after looking at them. So I think that this kind of model of doing things, there is scope to implement this on numerous levels, and not just at the local level too, because in Belgium, the Minister of Culture has a citizens cabinet with 150 randomly selected citizens who will be advising him on his next policy area that he has to make a speech on in Parliament in October. So usually every year he just meets with the kind of established arts organizations and the other vested interests that have an influence on that decision making. And this year he's decided to also have the citizens cabinet to balance out with those vested interests. So I think that we can take some inspirations from some of these changes and incorporate more deliberative methods and more randomly selected citizens to even out the balance of power between the elected and the electors. And hopefully in the long term, this is not obviously something that would change things overnight, but in the long term, if this is a kind of process that becomes institutionalized and these kinds of assemblies happen on a very regular basis, we can regain our trust in our system of government and in our democracy. Thank you.
On this very optimistic note, I have to note some more pessimistic comments. Whenever we experiment with democracy and we try to get people engaged in this participatory methods, we see that at the first stage, people do get engaged, do participate, this experiment seems to be working, and we engage in politics, but then we get bored. We don't want politics that much in our lives. We distance ourselves from essentially a conflict zone, and over time, these participative methods, when implemented in particular cities, they drop in popularity. The question is whether this is good or this is neutral. That's okay. Can we accept this this level of participation? And is this participation in democracy the ends of a democracy? Is this the matter why we have democracy? Or Ivayllo, I see your...
I just wanted to add to this. From your example, it's also clear that usually these participatory democratic events are on a local basis, in a city, in a town, so that it is difficult to imagine this thing on a national level or international or something like that. We have to think about this, that territories, that the borders have disappeared, have become blurred, and we are, how shall I say, it is more important to our lives what happened somewhere abroad, very, very far away from me, than what happens with my neighbors. That's the major development that happened in our world. It's more important, for me, it's more important what the American president will say than my president, because we talked about him. I mean, the decision that he will take are more important than this one. And that's why these sort of civic mobilizations are very often engaged space, living space. A street, a neighborhood, this sort of thing. So, I mean, that's...
Well, I mean, I think the Belgian example I gave with the Minister of Culture having a citizens' cabinet to determine national level policy is a counter example to how this could actually be used on a wider scale if because he's planning to do this with other policy areas in the following years, not just on a one-off basis. And obviously he's the first kind of innovator, but I think he's trying to convince his colleagues to do the same. I haven't seen it anywhere else on that scale, but I think that there's definitely scope to innovate on that level. And to counter your argument earlier, Wojciech, in South Australia, since 2013, the new premier that came in, his whole model of government has been better together, and it hasn't just been one-off that they've organized one assembly. There's been over 10 of them, and it's combined with other methods like participatory budgeting and kind of online voting for what people want funded in their communities, which are projects that are put online by other people. So it's more of the shift in mentality overall that I think is a thing. And I think it's, obviously most people don't want to devote all of their time to politics, but I think if you switch the system to this way, where you know that your fellow citizens at one point or another are also involved in these decisions, you yourself might only be chosen once to participate for a couple of weeks and that's it, but I think you develop a regained trust in the way things work if you know that this is the way that decisions are being taken, that it's not just a purely top-down process by the elected politicians and the vested interests that usually influence them.
No, I like these experiments in democracy, these innovations in democracy, because I believe that revolutions are healthy from time to time, especially when they are not so big. But I'll manage, thank you. But let's turn to the question of why to experiment with all of these participatory methods and so on. What are the ends of democracy? I was turning to Onofrio, but you're free to say. But we have experimented with democracy for thousands of years, and we reached the moment where, well, after Second World War, historically important moment, when he said, "This is a good system. This is not the best system, but this is the best we can get." So we said, okay, so that's fine. But then we want to experiment again and again and again. For what? What stands behind this need for what is the end of democracy?
There is no end in democracy, there is no content in democracy.
Non c'è fine nella democrazia, non c'è contenuto nella democrazia.
Ebbene,
Well, now,
come dice giustamente Alain Caillé,
as Alain Caillé says, democracy has no content, has no end. It must not have an end, because democracy is a system where subjects, where individuals agree on the world in a discourse. They discursively create their world. This is the end of democracy. If this is not possible, there is no democracy. For this to be possible, we need, in my view, that a community takes again possession of the productive factors, money, the land, work. This is a key factor. If there is not this, there cannot be democracy. If a community has no sovereignty on productive factors, that's to say the basis of production and distribution of resources, there cannot be democracy. This is why I'm skeptical about participatory experiments evoked by CLAUDIA, because in those experiments I don't see this form of reappropriation, repossession. This is true that for this to be possible, the community must inhabit its own territory, its own region. This is a key factor. But this is not the problem of scale. Well, it is not a problem like we can decide this locally but not at a wider scale. Once there were some mediation mechanisms, there were parties that allowed to widen the scale and to allow a larger community to put in place a project of society. Well, today, I do believe that today we pursue a level of this mediation because we want to adhere more and more to our needs, to our desires, and we create a sort of short circuit because we want to remove mediation. The less powerful we become, we have the impression we have control over things because we adhere more and more to our contour, to our environment, to our milieu, but in doing so, we lose sovereignty on the factors that are likely to have a real influence over our life, that are elsewhere. So we need a coalition of people, and we need to pursue more ambitious targets. So I do believe that today we are in a sort of trap, of snare. On the one hand, there are governments that inspire themselves to a technical governance of the world. They are neutral government that do not put in place any idea of society because their aim is simply to allow that each individual to fulfill his or her project of life. But in doing so, we do not fulfill collective freedom. We do not put in place a collective discussion on the world we want. So all the Western governments today simply pursue some neutral and technical devices with no form of identity whatsoever, and that leave individuals in a vacuum, in an empty space. And populisms respond to this. Populism somehow try to revive in a brutal manner a form of collective identity against the neutrality of formally democratic regimes. We are under this grip. I mean, on the one hand, populisms that do not allow democracy, and on the other hand, the technical and neutral government that does not put in place an ideal world and does not allow for collective discussion. When these two poles unite, as is the case in the current Italian government with Prime Minister Renzi, that on the one hand puts in place the European austerity, it is a devout to the liberal neutralism, and on the other hand, there's a populist phase. So all reforms, and I'm telling this for those who are not familiar with the Italian businesses, Italian affairs, but I think these are examples that go beyond the Italian horizon. Well, all the reforms that are being put in place by the Italian government right now take inspiration from one only principle, placing everywhere in the civil service, in the work, in the school, some heads, some bosses. So to disseminate the social systems of masters, of chiefs, that can tell people how they have to believe, and they have a power of life or death on people, because this seems to be the only mechanisms to have for our society to work. So there is a discredit. I mean, they don't think that people can can discuss and agree on their destiny and fate. So for doing things to motivate people, they have thought to elect a chief with power of death and life over subjects.
Now, yes, Ivayllo, you
I want just to
yeah, please
add something to what he says, or radicalize his his speech. If democracy is not about producers, I will add also defense of the territory. If these centers of economy and the military thing has gone very far away from us, democracy now has become a matter of consumers. We consume democracy. We are consumers, and that's why it should be interesting. They make some games. They will give you some presents if you vote, and this sort of thing. I don't know whether you know this book by Stephen Coleman, The Tale of Two Cities, where he says that he compares the House of Parliament and the House of Big Brother. He says Big Brother is actually the real democracy because people can vote, can get people out of this house. You can vote them out of the house. So that
choose the chief.
You choose. Yeah.
Primary elections,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
There are two persons
you
and
choose.
you can choose.
Yeah. So we consume this democracy, and it should be interesting, and that's why we get bored very, very easily, because it should be ever new, always new. A consumer looks for novelty. So that's.
Yeah, but let's say I use this word, which is very maybe not politically correct, but the masses do. But then masses don't have a short-lived memory. And of course, we have experimented with that kind of decision-making before. It was weak democracies. It happened, it was recurring. It was despised by political scientists of the ancient Athens, and so on and so on. The question is still, for what reason should we pursue democratic ends today? Because you mentioned discursive action. This is, but why? Maybe instead we could have this technocratic, you know, very intelligent aristocracy of spirit decision that would put Enlightenment decisions into play, and we should just forget about the. Please do.
Dobbiamo, perché i deboli hanno tutto da perdere da questo tipo di sistema. Io penso che un sistema così concertato
I think that in a system of this kind, a system of this kind cannot work in the long run, and its functioning is to the detriment of the weak. We have already experimented this kind of system in the 19th century. We had an extraordinary development and growth in that century, but completely uneven. As Piketty tells us, we are back to the level of inequalities of the early 20th century. I think this is just one of the many reasons why it seems fair and beautiful for me to work together to decide once again together the organization of the world ourselves.
Okay, but now just last question to you, Claudia, and then we start debating. So please keep your questions and comments ready and at hand and bay. So Claudia, when you are so fond of the participatory democracy methods, the practice of having random people decide, what do you think of them? And I think Ivayllo made a very valid point about consumers. Are there consumers of the political system, or they're citizens? And what does it involve? How are you sure they're taking their decision for the better good, not just for their individualist preference? Or maybe we are at this stage that we believe that out of collective individual preferences we make best decisions.
Okay, I'll try to speak a bit slower. Well, I think that the way the current system is designed does encourage people in a way to be consumers of democracy, but from all of the citizens' assemblies and the citizens' juries that I've studied, I look at just 10 of them in my most recent research around the world, but there have been others. It has shown that when people are given the time and the resources to come together and to deliberate and to make these decisions, they're able to have a very, very balanced discussion, and they're more than capable of coming to decisions about sometimes complex matters, and giving people an opportunity to come together and make collective decisions, I think ends up building trust in the end. I mean, precisely, you brought up inequality. I think that the way decisions are being made, the fact that they're always made by a certain political and economic elite, it correlates with that. If you open up the decision-making process with random selection for certain things, it brings in all sections of society which currently don't have a voice in the system. So I think that there are multiple benefits to this, not just democratically.
Okay. I've seen some people wanted to say something. I will. We have to arrange it this way. If you want to say something, please take the floor to the right of IVAYLO, and I'll pass the microphone to you.
Thank you. I am Peter Molnar, and I am from Hungary, and I was a member of parliament for 8 years in the 90s. And I'm also one of the founders and former leaders of Fidesz, the current governing party in Hungary, which you may know created a system which is up for political science to interpret to what extent is democracy, to what extent not. When I was in Fidesz, of course, it was a different thing. So I would like to raise a question or comment that I have a simple statement, and I don't mean to attack anybody, but I think that just want to make it sharp. I think that anybody who questions or rejects the importance of the participation in the institutions of representative democracy undermines democracy. Whatever way. So if someone says it's not credible anymore, campaign finance, party financing, impossible to do it in a fair or close to fair way, political representation in parliaments do not really have a say for whatever international, economic or other influences. So I see these are all relevant points, but I think if it is not attached that yet people really need to participate and really need to appreciate when people would like to take the role of becoming a politician, becoming member of parliament. And so I think that, and I wonder whether you agree with this. If not, then what do you propose instead? Because what I see in Hungary, and with some other participants, we had some conversations about it, it seems to this is a general problem, and it may be a general problem of the left, whatever other way we can also put it, that these kind of disillusionments in representative democracy basically undermine the ability of the left to create a strong representation. And I think it's really a dead-end road, really a self-defeating strategy, and it should really be changed.
I was just wondering, why did you not mention the speech of the current Hungarian Prime Minister from last year when he called upon creating illiberal democracy, whatever that would mean. Perhaps he was referring to some French philosophers, I don't know.
Just one word addition that basically I think that with the participatory techniques Claudia mentioned, and every consideration is important, but the bottom line, we need to go for participating in the simple basic institutions that have the formal legitimacy. Whatever group of people can gather and say, we represent the village, where is the legitimacy? Legitimacy comes from fairly organized elections. That's representative democracy. If it's not for your taste and you argue against it, either you say a working alternative or you yourself undermine democracy more than Viktor Orban, more than Erdogan, more than Putin. That's my provocative statements, and that's what I am angry about.
There is one, there are more people who want to say something. If I'll collect two more voices, and then we try to answer, and then we come again with some other comments and questions. Please, the floor is yours.
Questo discorso si collega nella mia mente a quello che si è svolto ieri mattina con una storica, Cinzia Berzot, si chiamava Gli anticorpi della democrazia. Parlava della democrazia ateniese che è stata citata, e quello che emergeva è che la democrazia in sé è una cosa difficile e il livello di manipolazione era elevato all'epoca di Pericle come lo è adesso. È una cosa molto difficile, ma quello che diciamo, mi veniva in mente è un'altra cosa. Io ho letto in questi anni, non so se conoscete la rivista Linus, in cui scrive un politologo che si chiama Galli e parla del fatto che la democrazia come la conosciamo noi oggi è stata svuotata dall'interno dalla concentrazione del potere nelle multinazionali, nelle mani delle multinazionali. Io questa cosa l'ho messa a fuoco in un evento che può sembrare secondario. Quando io ho portato la mia prima figlia a fare la prima vaccinazione, non ho potuto scegliere quale vaccino fare perché noi abbiamo la cosiddetta esavalente. Non so se si possa tradurre in un'altra lingua, ma sono 6 vaccini in una volta, di cui 4 obbligatori e 2 cosiddetti facoltativi, che non sono facoltativi perché sono tutti insieme. Quando io mi sono arrabbiata, mi hanno detto lei ha ragione, era difficile darmi torto, perché non potevo scegliere, ma questo produce l'industria farmaceutica. Questo abbiamo, se lei vuole lo fa, se no se ne va. E io ho fatto un esavalente. E in quel momento una teoria è diventata la mia vita e la vita di mia figlia. E questo mi ha privato di una libertà piuttosto, secondo me, importante. Allora Galli proponeva, così in quelle cose che io leggo, che forse anche i consigli di amministrazione delle grandi multinazionali dovrebbero essere eletti. Ora non lo so se è una cosa possibile o se va letta come una provocazione, però è un fatto, cioè non credo che cambiando il governo italiano io potrò scegliere quale vaccinazione fare.
Of course, there is a question how to make complicated and complex decisions when people are not well informed about them, and that's one of the major issues. But there is one other voice now, before we try to address these questions and comments.
I want to follow up on what Peter said, and it's a fundamental question. It's not only about ways of making decisions, but could it not be so, there are several people who argue this, that the problems that we are facing in the future require so unpopular decisions, and climate change is, for example, one of those issues, so unpopular decisions that no democratic system, participatory, representative, or of any form, will be capable of making and implementing those decisions, which would mean limiting the freedom of people, for example, not only when it comes to choosing what vaccination to take, but if at all to be allowed to drive a car, how many people should live in one apartment, things like this. There are credible descriptions of a future influenced by climate change that would require such decisions. So, in the field of democracy theory, what is the alternative of decision making?
Yeah, well, so let's say you have 3 to 5 minutes each to respond. Yeah, value?
Yes. Actually, this question is extremely important, which Peter, were you Peter? Yeah, raised. I was not pessimistic about democracy. I think that we have to be realistic about democracy. Democracy is a way to pacify societies, to choose, if possible, better leaders, and to stop some crazy decisions, this sort of thing. But what I see now, this is what I try to show with this term of consuming democracy, we are trying to, all our societies are trying to invent more and more and more democracy. For instance, everything should be transparent. In Bulgaria, they want to put cameras in the parliament, in the Council of Ministers, so that citizens can direct live, watch what they decide and whatever. Every possible decision should be on the internet. Every possible negotiation should be known right away, instantly. So this sort of thing. So I think that this we expect too much from democracy today, and that we have to have a more realistic view. It is citizenship participation is something boring, as you said, it's something boring. People have to invest time, have to be patient. Maybe not many people will do that. I don't know why we are always after mass participation in elections and things like that. It's not a mass thing. Maybe few people will actually do it. So that what I'm worried about is this over-expectation, which creates the disillusionment that you actually noticed. And as to your question, that's, of course, a very, very important thing, and maybe a catastrophe is coming. I don't know, that's really climate change. Today we have 300,000 migrants. Tomorrow we will have 100 million Bangladeshis on the border. What do we do then? That's really...
Claudia. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks. To pick up on the very last thing you said about why we're after mass participation anyways, and this is linked actually to your point earlier, I don't think that questioning representative democracy undermines democracy. I think to recognize the fact that it is only the well-off and the better educated who are voting, who are campaigning, who are protesting, who are taking part in any kind of political activity these days, it means that they are the ones who are having a greater impact and influence on the decisions that are being taken by our politicians. It's why probably your multinationals are able to influence what vaccines your children are taking. And I think that spreading the decision-making power to people can have an impact on that. And I think that links into what your point was too, that on these difficult questions around climate change and in many countries around austerity, where do we cut budgets? These are hard decisions and politicians don't want to take them. And in some areas, especially around climate change, not much is happening because of that. And I think precisely for that kind of reason, having these kind of independent, non-partisan citizens' assemblies to help make these decisions could take away some of the politics from it and get rid of some of the inertia which is preventing progressive change from happening. Like the example I gave about the Melbourne's People's Panel, I mean, it's a great thing, but they did it because they had to make massive budget cuts. And so for them, it was a politically neutral way of deciding what to do. So obviously they had their incentives for holding this panel, but I think the fact that the citizens took part, that the city really appreciated the process that took place, changes the trust in the politicians and people have a greater belief in those decisions that were taken. So I think that there is a potential for these kind of citizens' assemblies to make a big difference for the problems we are facing today. I'll end there. Thank you.
Yes, but still the question is how legitimate they are if they are not elected, but rather randomly chosen. Because ultimately, legitimacy of this decision is sanctioned by someone who got into the office and uses participatory democracy to support his signature under a decision done with the help of citizens. Still, they are not responsible and they will never be accountable. He or she who is in office and takes decision to make this participation mechanism is, so maybe this is just another way of making, it's another candy. It's another candy in a democratic shop.
I mean, I think that's a very valid point to raise, but I think that precisely the notion of random selection means that everybody has an equal chance of being chosen. It also means that that group is actually much more representative of society than the elected politician who was elected by the well-educated and the better off who turned out to vote. So I think that if these kind of assemblies are actually given a genuine power, not just as a kind of consultative body, but I think that there could be legitimacy in that as well.
And what will happen to those people if they make bad decisions? Well, we can debate. But I have another idea. Why don't we, because we know that certain groups don't go to vote, and this is one of the reasons there is participatory method. So usually people after their most productive period in life go to vote, or people who are very young and not necessarily know everything go to vote. And this is when this change chant is being uttered, and it is addressing these groups of population, but this group in the middle doesn't vote. But why don't we take away voting? And what happens? Will people start to vote suddenly? Because, 1989, this whole period in the Soviet bloc countries was the period that everybody demanded to vote. Everybody wanted freedom to vote. Everyone wanted to participate. So maybe it's not a bad thing to take away voting for a moment, to let the people understand how important it is. Well, ONOFRIO, please comment. I mean, there were more important questions. I'm sorry, I just allowed myself to speak a bit too long.
Provocazione molto importante. A very important provocation. I don't know if our Hungarian friend was making reference also to what I had mentioned, but I fully agree with him, and I'm optimistic and very trustful. I trust a lot these democratic institutions in their classical forms with all the representative institutions. I think that right now there is just a problem with the political contents, political proposals, political offer on the part of individuals on the political scene. But I really trust and I'm confident that by means of this democratic institution, we can reverse the route and be back to a substantial democracy. And I also firmly believe, that this regime that was born at the beginning of the 80s based on the idea that the world must not be built collectively, but is just a spontaneous and ex post result of interactions across individuals. I think that this kind of system is over, and the successes it still has are just some final fireworks, so to say. I think that the system that is based on what Carpolani called the merchandization of the productive, commoditization of productive factors like land, money, and labor. I think that system of based on the free circulation and commoditization of these factors is destined to fail, provoking an environmental deregulation, destined to result in a financial deregulation, in an economic dysregulation, and destined to result in precarious lives when work is turned into a good as the other goods. Our lives are made precarious. We are no longer able to design our lives. So I'm optimistic. This system based on the commoditization of the productive factors of the basis of the society builds up all the series of dysregulations that create a form of reactions and transformation. Communities want to own again these factors and be back to democracy. So, political subjects should act and propose this, because there is a sort of taboo today in terms of being again the owners of the productive factors. This is democracy. It's not communism. When we are again a community, we can start and make choices that seem to be unpopular today. In terms of the environment, we need to make unpopular choices, as suggested by our friend. This can be done only if we become a community. Until we are, as long as we are a mass of individuals, one separated from the other, these decisions we won't be able to make these decisions when we are again a community. So we'll be able to be back to a production that respects the environment, that respects the lives of people. But I'm really optimistic. We should put in place a serious program about this. Today, even the radical left think just to increment and increase a sort of horizontal participation. We do not need any longer to remain in the horizontal level. We have to recover a verticality, a collective, discursive verticality. We should put forward a serious political proposal, otherwise we'll always be imprisoned in a stalemate, as it was the case for Tsipras. That is due to the fact that Tsipras himself and the radical left have not a system project in their political proposal. A repossession of productive factors has not been included. There's just a compassion. So I'm not against democratic institutions. I'm not against populism. I do believe that populism is the disease, as not the therapy, not the treatment. So I think that today it is high time to be back and construct the great politics by means of the intermediate entities. We should be back to the great politics that decides on the way the world should work together with all the others, making collective decisions.
Until they think. There is this famous book by Albert Hirschman, Exit Voice Loyalty. And in your, what you present, of course, sounds optimistic and so on, but you don't take into consideration the second option, the exit voice option. Contemporary societies are not closed. They are not closed economically, politically, and so on. Socialism in Lenin's time faced this option because revolution stopped worldwide. So they had to construct socialism in one isolated country. And they had to build a wall, and they had to kill the people on the front, the border, and so on and so forth. And this became a nightmare, in my opinion. So how do you solve this problem? You want to do something unpopular or whatever. You want to build a community, this sort. But you need to convince the people to stay there, not to vote with their feet. Well, how do you do this? Either you have a global project where people will be in the same situation all over the world, or you have to force them to stay there. That's for me, this is a difficult question. I don't know.
I think IVAYLO couldn't be more right. That referring to global situation today, it's especially difficult decisions have to be taken from the point of view of global affairs. Whether you're elected by a global public opinion, you're never elected by global public opinion, but even so, there is a notion of collective global good, because these are global dilemmas that we're facing. And then it requires a sort of leadership that we are longing for, we're talking about, that we're missing, that perhaps is not so democratic, perhaps, or may turn out not to be so democratic when it's there, that can answer it from this point of view. But there was another historical discussion at the beginning of 20th century on how to make foreign policy. It was American discussion between those who would say that certain types of decision do not require consultation or they cannot be influenced by public opinion because public opinion is stupid. The others, of course, argued that it's not the case. And the debate is still ongoing. Whether you have democratic legitimacy to invade or intervene in another country or not. Should you go along the opinion polls, or is the risk of losing popularity worth it to help save 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 people? Maybe not, or maybe yes. This is the dilemma, this is the debate that we're questioning. And it takes a person in a position that for time being is elected to take responsibility for such actions. I'm wondering on the other hand, you have elected officials in, let's say, Iceland that say they will take only 50 immigrants, refugees. And then you have demos saying that they will take 1,000 times more, and they overturn the democratic leadership. So there is an interesting moment in where's the responsibility, where's the thinking about the common good, and if this thinking about common good is a good thing or not, also because it's a tricky thing. We're still open to some questions from the floor or comments and questions.
Can I give a little answer to IVAYLO? I am working in the last years.
Risposta. Negli ultimi anni sto lavorando alla costruzione di uno spazio euro-mediterraneo e abbiamo tutte le conoscenze, i modelli organizzativi per organizzare una buona vita in uno spazio che va
the national borders, and we can
nazionali.
think to a macro-regional level in which to try to think only to the material security of people. I think that it is possible. And when you have the material security, you can go everywhere, you can go wherever you want, but you are in some way linked to your space. So I don't think to a little nation that closes its borders. I think that we can, in this period, in this historical phase, we can think to a more wide space that is, for me, the Euro-Mediterranean space, where we can find the civilization heritage in which we can find the roots of our civilization.
So we have a question from the floor, please.
Yes, sorry. I am a local bioinformatician, and I have two questions. One is what I was saying on the fact that there was this change in the kind of democracy around the 80s, 70s, 80s, and after this fact of the environmental changes. And I was thinking that actually the first awareness and basically all what is needed to do for policy was known in the 70s. Basically, the environmental crisis appeared in the 70s, and just after, basically, the political system decided not to pick on this and go for something else. So I think probably this is a very difficult problem, basically because the politics refused to answer at the right moment. And then the second question, more on Carla, on the participation, Claudia, sorry. And so it was about, what about Switzerland, in the sense in which there, since a lot of time, this idea of a lot of referendum, a lot of participation nearby. Yes, randomness is very interesting. As a bioinformatician, optimization algorithm use a lot of randomness and is very useful. But maybe, how about Switzerland? How is different?
I'll just add to that. To the first question, the environmental issues have been of concern to the societies and nations that were rapidly modernizing, industrializing themselves already beginning of 20th century, like Germany. Now, Timothy Snyder, one of the historians of that time, that he's dealing with this period, has published a book and also a number of articles showing that it was Hitler's concern also to answer the question of ecology and ecological. And really, he demonstrates how this concept of Lebensraum, of expansion, was dictated by ecological fear of losing the productive lands for agriculture in Germany. So maybe there are different ways to respond to difficult questions that are unpopular. Are we ready to take all of them? And then the second question was about the yes, Switzerland. Yes, I think this should also go to IVAYLO, this question, with a little add-on on my side. Would Switzerland be such a democratic polity with so many referendums if they did not have mountains? Mountains.
Okay, thank you. The question about Switzerland is really interesting, actually, because it's true. They have lots of referenda. They also have a culture of town hall meetings which again always have the people who are already very engaged to attend them. But personally, I'm not a big fan of referenda as a way of making these complex decisions, because you tend to ask people a question about what they think when they don't have the time or the resources to make a proper decision about what they think about that. So that's why I like these kind of deliberative methods where you give people the time and the resources to come together, to deliberate, to exchange ideas, bring different perspectives to the table, and then make a decision. So it's a very different process of arriving there. And in Switzerland, actually, the whole referenda process is a huge benefit to the populist right-wing party, because they use it as an opportunity to further their campaigns against immigrants and immigration, and it ends up having quite a negative effect. And I think that that's quite one way that they're able to mobilize their base through the referenda. It's not always a positive thing, I think.
Yeah, Switzerland is illustrating my point that actually participative democracy needs space, needs spatial confinement and mountains, if you wish, so that the confederation has not much politics on the national level, on the supra-cantonal level, but on the local level, in the communities, of course, people decide very many things. But what I wanted to add here to these examples that we give is another form of democracy that becomes more and more important. Democracy, I don't know whether I should call it like that, but which is the effect of opinion polls on political decision. So some politician does something, and the next day we have sociologists who say so and so much percentage approve this, okay, you go on. So this is a sort of referendum, permanent referendum, where nobody is responsible. Your point here, those people whom the poller asks privately, they don't give their name, they don't answer, they have no responsibility for their opinion. Tomorrow they will change their opinion. So let's consider a little this tendency, and I call this too much democracy, too much, well, democracy life, whatever you want to call it.
I will advertise an excellent article on Eurozine website, Democracy Live, where IVAYLO also is in the discussion on this.
Thank you. Yeah, because there is this utopia all over, I think, Europe. I hear about it. The possibility for us to vote on every single subject on the internet. It is technically it's possible. They want to decide something. They want to build a road. They want to vote a law, and we press a button, and then so and so percentage of people want or don't want. Is this democratic? Is it really democratic, or the former way of doing politics, as you actually suggested, was that somebody takes responsibility for a certain period of time, he or she is elected, he's given this task, and then he or she answers for that. In previous times, they could cut them the head. I mean, he answers physically even. Now we enter in another stage where politicians can have no responsibility whatsoever. They are supported by opinion polls. They say, well, here people are behind me. And I wonder whether this thing is really democratic, whether this is not something that goes beyond the anonymous people answering to machines or to sociologists and to whatever.
Well, the time is up, and I think these were excellent remarks for the conclusion. The discussion is ongoing. We don't provide the final answer, but definitely the question raised are very important. Thank you all for participating, voting, and discussing with us.